Good evening. So every summer since I was in kindergarten, my parents would rent land and they would grow vegetables. At first, it was cucumbers for get-me pickles, and I remember one year they decided to grow 10 acres of cucumbers. And I was thinking, how are we going to, pick all these cucumbers by hand? Um, if the rows were so long that if you stood on one end and you looked at the end, you'd have to squint your eyes to see the person at the other end. I mean, that was just how vast the fields were, right? And the little kid in me thought, well, God, I wish there was a machine where we could, magnetize the DNA in the cucumbers, and then, use a magnet and like repel them into these brown burlap bags, and that's how we would do the job. And unfortunately, a wonderful machine like that has not been invented yet. But luckily, in my family, there are 7 kids and 80 first cousins, so everybody pitched in. Right? After middle school, my parents started to grow vegetables like pea blossoms or bitter melons for the St. Paul Farmers Market. And back in those days, there were very few farmers markets, so they were always full of people from different ethnic groups, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And I loved the smell of like sweet cilantro or tiger lilies as you would get swept up like in the seeds of customers, right? But the truth was that when we started growing for the St. Paul Farmers Market, the work became very hard. And our days were filled with long hours from 4 o'clock in the morning to midnight if we were lucky, and filled with like frantic activities. We'd rush the market and we'd have to put our produce on the table while we were bagging sales. And we'd have to rush back to the farm and then pick produce for that evening and wash it all into the early mornings. And then we'd sleep for a couple hours and start all over again. And even though the work was backbreaking, I have to say that some of those days were of my fondest memories of my childhood. I remember weeding with my brothers and sisters while we would be belting out like church songs, like "Here I Am, Lord" or "City of God," right? Because we were Catholic school kids. I remember listening to my dear grandpa. He would tell us the best Hmong folk tales, and one of my favorite was this guy named Tana. And Tana's father impregnated his mother by turning into a white elephant and urinating on her. Right? Very interesting. One of the experiences, though, of the farmer's market was that I discovered I had a real knack for talking, right? And I would make these like crazy signs, and I would put together these really snazzy wordings. Like, for example, one of them would be, "Today must be your lucky day because everything on this table is just $1." Or "Summer's endless bounties, ask me for more." Right? And so I became very popular at the farmer's market, and my signs were very popular too. I was like my parents' #1 seller. And all that craziness, all that wonderful craziness, that was my childhood. Now, there was a controversy that arose at the St. Paul Farmers Market when I was in the 8th grade. It was actually during the same time that my English class was reading To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And the crux of the controversy was about access to permanent stalls. And so the backstory was that the St. Paul Farmers Market on Saturday was the most profitable market in the whole city. But it had a limited number of permanent stalls because there was limited space in that one block. And the new stalls only became available when old farmers retired. And on top of that, farmers could actually have up to 3 stalls. And then on top of that, all the stalls were distributed. Once they were available, they were distributed based on seniority. And so basically what that meant was that the older white farmers all had permanent stalls. They had a guaranteed space to sell their produce on Saturday mornings. But the new farmers, who were mostly Hmong, they had to wait on a waiting list that could take anywhere from 5 to 10 years to get access to the permanent stall. And that year in particular, there was a proposal to change the rules, to decrease the number of stalls from 3 to 2. And the thinking behind that was that that would help some of the new farmers get access to the stalls much more quickly. Now, all of that came to head at the annual meeting, right? So I was this 14-year-old geeky kid with like crazy glasses. And at the very last moment, my parents forced me to go with them to the annual meeting to interpret for them. So I had no clue at all about what was going to be on the agenda. But I could tell that something was going to be happening because when we got to the church, that's where the meeting was going to be held, and we went downstairs, the whole room was filled with people. And of course, the Hmong farmers were like huddled in one corner, and the rest of the room was filled with white farmers. But I could feel the tension. Now, I don't know why, but for some reason, the farmers market didn't hire an interpreter for that meeting that year. And so when the meeting got started and people started talking about the proposed change, I noticed all the farmers, the Hmong farmers, were listening really intensely, but they didn't say anything. They didn't stand up. They didn't voice their opinion because there was an interpreter to interpret for them. And I remember just praying, like, God, please, let someone who's Hmong, who speaks English well, let that person stand up and say something, defend the Hmong people, right? And as I was listening, actually, back and forth, and as the comments actually became more and more heated and more agitated, my body was actually absorbing those reactions. My legs started shaking, my palms were like really sweaty. I could literally feel my head like becoming tighter and tighter. And earlier that day in my English class, we were studying like chapter 31 in To Kill a Mockingbird. And it was in that chapter, there was that scene where Atticus says to Scout, you can never really know a man, right, until you've stood in his shoes and walked around in them. And I was thinking about what Atticus was saying, especially as this meeting was like dragging on and on and on. And I kept thinking about Atticus and thinking about Atticus and thinking about Atticus. And then suddenly, like in a moment of blind nothingness, I stood up and I was talking really fast. And I said, my name is Pakou Hang, I'm in the 8th grade, and I think this rule change is a great idea. And then I went on to tell the room about what I learned in English class that day. And I was imploring the white farmers to actually put themselves into the shoes of the Hmong farmers and see how they would feel, right? At least I think that's what I said. Like, that's what people told me, but I really have like nothingness, right? But I do remember, actually, though, after the meeting, a lot of people came up to me, and they said, congratulations, good job. And there was an older white woman who came, and she was, you could tell that she had been teary-eyed, and she said, nice job. And I remember just looking at her and feeling like I had wanted to cry, too. So that night, the St. Paul Farmers Market membership decided to vote to change the rules, right? And now, almost 25 years later, almost half of all the farmers in the Twin Cities farmers markets, right? Almost half of them are non-Hmong. The St. Paul Farmers Market changed drastically that night, I think in ways that the membership couldn't even imagine. And yes, Hmong farmers now have greater access to permanent stalls. Like, that's a good thing, right? But honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So according to the Agriculture Research and Management Survey, crazy name, it's essentially the research arm of the USDA. According to that arm, they say that local food sales have been skyrocketing for the past 20 years. And in fact, the latest figures going back to 2012, local food sales topped $6.1 billion with a B. In Minnesota, we have seen similar trends. I mean, back in 2004, the number of local farmers markets were only like 58. This year, there's going to be over 176 of them. So almost 3 times the number of farmers markets there were 10 years ago, right? And local foods, by definition, includes the growing of fresh fruits and vegetables in close proximity to the end user. And so in 2011, I got a fellowship from the Bush Foundation to examine the Twin Cities local food system. And I was particularly interested in the opportunities and the challenges that were facing Hmong farmers. And I began interviewing Hmong farmers from St. Paul to St. Cloud, from Minneapolis to Marshall. And what I discovered was just so heartbreaking for me. Because my Hmong farmers were surrounded by people and industries that were just celebrating and exalting local food and local farmers. But my farmers were actually struggling more than they ever had. Many folks couldn't get access to land at affordable rates. They couldn't get land tenure, so they weren't growing things like strawberries or blueberries where they could actually make more money off of. Many wanted to get loans, right? They wanted to buy their own land. They wanted to buy their own tractors, to buy their own assets so they could make their operations much more efficient. But the landowners who they were renting from wouldn't give them land leases, and the banks wouldn't process loans without land leases. Many folks wanted to sell outside of the farmers market. They wanted to sell to schools or to restaurants or to hospitals, but they didn't have the money to invest in coolers or refrigerated trucks, which all those institutions required because of food safety laws. And then many of the farmers wanted to get help on what is the true cost of production? What should I price my Brussels sprouts at or my carrots at so that I could actually make a profit and leave something for my kids? But all of those farm business management training classes were in English. And my folks, they didn't speak English. They didn't read and write English. I also heard, just crazy stories. There was this one story about a white farmer in Dakota County. And he said he would rent land to Hmong farmers at $300 an acre. But The Hmong farmers had to agree for that white farmer and his extended family to come on their fields whenever they wanted to and take whatever they wanted to free of charge. There was another story about a Hmong farmer who was so excited because he'd gotten a contract with a local ethnic restaurant to sell this restaurant on bunches of cilantro and mint for $1 a bunch. And he was just so happy. And then he found out halfway through his contract that the restaurant owner was also buying bunches of cilantro and mint from a white farmer, but the restaurant owner was paying the white farmer $2 a bunch. And so this Hmong farmer set up an appointment, and he went to go and talk to the restaurant owner. He said, "Sir, can you just increase the price you're paying me just to 50 cents so that I can just at least make a little bit more money?" And the restaurant owner got very upset. And he said, "If you don't like my prices, stop, selling to me." And he just discontinued that contract, right? So these were the stories and these were the things that I was hearing. And I could sense there was a problem. I mean, my farmers were working so hard, but they were barely making it. But I didn't know what the answer was. I didn't know what the solution was. And it wasn't until a couple months into my fellowship that I had went to a community meeting, a community gathering, and there was a bunch of Hmong farmers there. And at the end of that meeting, one of the women farmers, she got up and she said, "We have to stop waiting for people to come and save us because we can save ourselves. We can save ourselves." When she said that, it was like a eureka moment for me. I was like, oh yeah, that's the answer. That's the answer. We can save ourselves. We can organize, we can come together, we can organize, we can make something change, right? And that's actually what we did. We came together, we formed a nonprofit. We had that nonprofit be made up of Hmong farmers and led by Hmong farmers, actually involving so many of the people that I grew up with. We decided to adopt a cooperative model as a template for how we would operate and interact with each other. And we dedicated ourselves to the values of building long-term community wealth, not just instant income gratification, right? We were also committed to this idea that Hmong farmers should be lifting up other people in the agricultural system. And so we wanted to better a system where the people who were picking the food were at the forefront. We wanted to have a better food system that really lifted up small farmers, ethnically diverse farmers, folks who were food producers, people who would be interested in working in cooperatives so they would decrease their risk, but at the same time increase their economic opportunities because of the economies of scale. They could be building actual equity and power. So you might be wondering, okay, so what does that actually mean, right? Like what does that look like? So imagine a school district coming to us and saying, "Hey, we want to buy 1,000 pounds of potatoes for the next 10 weeks. Well, by themselves, my farmers, because of the size of their farms, they would never have been able to fulfill that contract. But if they got together in a group, in a cooperative, right, each person could be contributing a little bit to that contract, and lo and behold, they would have the contract. And on top of that, they could all cost share the actual delivery expenses to take all those potatoes to the school, right? It was a win-win. That is the power of cooperatives. That is the power of communities coming together. So at the end of To Kill a Mockingbird, right, Scout says, neighbors bring food with death and flowers with illness and little things in between. She said, Boo was our neighbor. He'd given us 2 soap dolls, a broken chain and watch, a pair of good luck pennies, and our lives. But neighbors are supposed to give back. And we had never put back what we took out of that tree. We had given him nothing, and it made me sad. Scout was just a little girl in that story, but even she understood the power of community. And so that's my question to you all tonight. Hmong farmers are your neighbors. They grow the food that nourishes your body, that brings your families together around kitchen tables and holiday rituals. They work sun up and sun down so you can have farmers markets where you go and meet up with your friends and you reminisce about the time that you spent growing up on your grandparents' farm, right? Hmong farmers have an idea. They know how to create a better food system that works for everybody. But the question is, are you willing to stand with them to make that a reality? Because they need you. Hmong farmers need you to persuade your schools, your hospitals, your local grocery stores to buy from immigrant farmers. They need you to call up your elected officials to demand Congress update the school formula so that schools like Bertrand, they can buy good, real food and not put such a strain on their budget. Hmong farmers need you to have honest conversations with your family members, your coworkers, about the real cost of food in this country and who is paying for it. Hmong farmers know how to create a better food system that lifts up everyone, but are you willing to stand up with them to make that a reality? Thank you.